that we've seen and I've talked about before in previous videos. So basically,
Paul Beckwith is needing to watch the movie The Day After Tomorrow. Is it Dennis Quaid in there? And so he can kind of know how to act if he believes in what he's saying. Like the emergency of it. And that's a movie that I'm rewatching now because based on Canadian elections, which was all about capitalism, people voted for who they thought would allow them to be less victims of capitalism without realizing that when you fix the toxicity of capitalism with capitalism, which was the only candidates, even Green, I think, is you've got some developmental disabilities, right? But that's Canadians. We're not gonna lead the world in how to save the biosphere from us, right? But I've written to Paul Beckwith in his comments, including in the last week, and there's very few comments, so he should be able to respond. And I've seen him respond to silly things, like about his cat or whatever. Now, if you listen to what he's going to say here,
this is an article which was published by the Weather Channel just a few days ago. The title, Earth is Approaching Dangerous, Irreversible Climate Tipping Points, Scientists Warn. So we're on the brink of crossing these critical tipping points from melting ice sheets to dying rainforests. Once they're triggered, these changes could accelerate global warming and actually be impossible to reverse.
There's a few flaws. First of all, he's done videos before that talks about results that tell us that we're already worse off than what this study does. So in a way, he's selling false hope, right? It's shallow ecology, and he doesn't know it. He just kind of is presenting things because he thinks if he stays with the same tone on the same topic long enough, he's going to convince his choir that's already convinced, to also from the couch wish their kids and grandkids good luck with that. So what he doesn't realize about tipping points, and I only watched half of the video, it's about 30 minutes, and I watched till 15, I'll finish it, I'd be surprised. He does say take this study with a grain of salt, but does he understand why? Like, for example, he's talking about tipping points, but he doesn't seem to show a clear understanding of what tipping points are, and also how some have passed, and he's talking about them as if they haven't been passed. For example, the Amazon is already a source of carbon, not a sink. And he's also talking about tipping points as if they are totally separate from our behaviors on this planet as a species. And that's not true. The tipping points aren't coming from outside the planet. They're coming from this particular species that I'm ashamed to share DNA with. And so you don't have to say if we pass. We will pass. Because if you measure our behaviors as a species that is more or less educated or totally clueless or extremely educated on this topic, is we're not changing our ways. So that means for certain all these tipping points will pass. That's why I'm saying I'm going to be the responsible adult in the room here, and I would definitely be the most responsible if I was an MP. And I'm going to say I'm watching The Day After Tomorrow again to help prepare me for the kind of leader that your kids and grandkids will need as a responsible adult in their life. Now listen to this here, and you're going to see how all of the scientists on these topics, whether they're somewhat known or average or super well known, will refrain from responding to me or avoid this topic. He's going to say what it is.
This is when we'll actually pull out all the stops and try things like solar radiation management and put huge money into carbon capture and things like that. But why should we wait until these things happen? Well, I guess that's maybe human nature. I don't know.
Now, he doesn't know because he doesn't want to know. And no other scientists talk about the climate emergency or Anthropocene as if they are connected to the reality that the villains are their own species. He doesn't want to know. I've communicated with him in his comments, but also I know at least one of his colleagues and that actually knows of my existence, but they won't address these topics either. The topic about what's wrong with our species, that we don't understand not only what a tipping point is, that you can't back it up and reverse it, that they're interconnected and they relate to our behaviors, which are measurable as not changing and in fact accelerating the problems that we're causing. So the tipping points have all passed, in the sense that if we love our kids and grandkids and we understand that sustainability relates to a concept in the system sciences that isn't species specific to maintain their business status quo, and that actually we rely on all these other species and ecosystems and climate and different parts of the earth that play different functions, and yet we kind of know, but we need to feed our kids instead of putting a condom, so we don't have to have so many kids to feed, and we can actually work on the problem. We are very much like this, and that includes the scientists, because I have yet to hear of one that knows more than I do about all these interconnected tipping points and the earth as a system, and yet is capable of discussing the reality of the human condition. So, folks, I'm telling you what happens in that movie, how there is, for a long period of time, really a hostility of living on the planet as the new state of the climate will find its new equilibrium. That's actually not kids that have not been born yet. That's kids that have been born. They will be living through this. So if you think of the past where there's cultures or generations that were extremely cruel to their kids, well, it doesn't beat this generation. And again, I wrote this to the BC Ministry of Education. I said we belong to a culture that is pro-generational child abuse. And it's because we're in denial about these things and we're not preparing kids for these things. And I include things like more nature based. And I'm not talking about just how to grow plants. I'm talking about the actual worldview that is formed before they become teenagers, which has to be the biosphere first, way before our species. And our species is not a life-giving species. It's a life-taking species. So if you measure species for this concept, we are shameful. We don't need to be, because we have these big brains where we can actually decide to actually have collective behaviors that make it the other way. But again, you'd have to abolish all types of economic systems, all religions. You'd have to really admit that every school at every level of age group or post-secondary are indoctrination and domestication centers. Are you ready to love your kids enough to have these kind of conversations? Because I don't know who is.